Walt Jenkins, a 71-year-old Vietnam veteran, faces public humiliation when his bicycle chain breaks outside the Iron Horse bar. Mocked by patrons, he quietly persists in fixing it, ignoring their jeers. Unbeknownst to the crowd, Walt's heroic past, saving 5 Marines in 1969, remains hidden beneath his faded Marine cap. One man, Gunny Thompson, recognizes Walt's Force Recon tattoo and quietly summons help. As tensions rise and rain falls, the roar of Harley engines signals an impending shift. What unfolds next transforms scorn into awe, revealing the power of unrecognized valor. Stay tuned to uncover Walt's triumph. If Walt's story of quiet courage inspires you, join our journey. Subscribe to my channel for more tales of unsung heroes. Your support fuels these stories, so hit that subscribe button, share with friends, and let's honor those who stand firm. Together, we'll keep their legacies alive. Walter Jenkins, a weathered 71-year-old with a face etched by time and unspoken stories, adjusted the faded Marine Corps cap that sat crooked on his silvered head. The cap was a relic, much like the man himself, its once vibrant emblem dulled by years of sun and sweat. As he pedaled his rusted Schwinn bicycle through the quiet streets of Millage, each turn of the pedals was a small act of defiance against the weight of his past. Vietnam had carved deep lines into his soul, stealing more than just his youth. It had taken friends, dreams, and a piece of his heart that no doctor could mend. His lean frame, once powerful enough to carry wounded men through a hail of bullets, now bore the stoop of age and memories too heavy to shrug off. The bicycle wasn't his choice. It was his necessity. After his third heart attack, the doctors had stripped him of his driver's license, a blow to his pride that stung almost as much as the shrapnel scars hidden beneath his faded flannel shirt. Too stubborn to beg for rides and too independent to be confined to his small, cluttered home, Walt had dusted off the 30-year-old Schwinn from his great garage, its paint chipped and frame more rust than metal, and made it his lifeline to the world. Today's journey was a familiar one, a 6-mile ride to the VA clinic just outside town. The doctors there would check his heart, tweak his medications, and nod politely as he brushed off their questions about his pain. Walt didn't complain, not about the ache in his chest, not about the arthritis gnawing at his joints, and certainly not about the loneliness that clung to him like damp air. He'd seen too much in the jungles of Southeast Asia, watched too many good men bleed out in the mud, to waste words on his own discomfort. What the people of Millage didn't know, because Walt never spoke of it, was that Staff Sergeant Walter Jenkins had once been a hero. In 1969, near Da Nang, he'd braved an ambush to save 5 wounded comrades, dragging them through enemy fire, returning again and again until every man was safe. The Silver Star meant for him had been lost in the fog of war, its paperwork buried in some forgotten filing cabinet. Walt didn't care. Just did what needed doing, he'd mutter when pressed, his voice low as if the memory itself was too heavy to lift into words. The afternoon sun bore down as Walt pedaled past the small businesses lining Main Street. His breath came in short, labored gasps, a fact he hated admitting even to himself. The clinic appointment was non-negotiable, though, and he pressed on, the Schwinn creaking beneath him. His route took him past the Iron Horse Bar, a rough-edged haunt where motorcycle enthusiasts from 3 counties gathered. Even in the early afternoon, the weekend crowd was already spilling out, their leather vests and polished bikes gleaming under the sun. Walt barely noticed them until his bicycle lurched violently beneath him. The chain worn thin and stretched beyond its limits, had snapped with a sharp clink. The sudden stop nearly threw him to the pavement, but he caught himself, dismounting with a quiet dignity that belied the ache in his knees. Kneeling beside the bike, he surveyed the damage. The chain had broken cleanly, a fixable problem, but one that required time and dirty hands. From his small tool pouch, he pulled a chain tool and a rag, his gnarled fingers moving with the muscle memory of a man who'd fixed worse under far graver circumstances. "Hey, old man, you can't park that heap of junk here." The voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking, from the direction of the bar's entrance. Walt didn't look up. He recognized the tone, arrogance laced with boredom. It came from a heavy-set man in his 30s, his leather vest stretched over a stained t-shirt, his face twisted in a sneer. "This ain't a repair shop for trash bikes," the man added, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. Walt kept his focus on the chain, his fingers steady despite the arthritis that made every movement a negotiation with pain. "Won't take but a minute, sir. Chain broke," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm, the way he'd spoken to panicked recruits in the chaos of battle. "I don't care if the whole damn thing exploded," the man snapped, stepping closer. "Move it somewhere else." His words drew a small crowd, other bar patrons drifting over, their faces a mix of amusement and indifference. "Let the fossil figure it out," someone called from the back, prompting a ripple of laughter. Another voice chimed in, colder. "Probably can't afford a car. Pathetic." The words landed like blows, each one striking at the pride Walt had carried through decades of hardship. He felt their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment pressing down harder than the sun. For a fleeting moment, he imagined standing up, dragging the broken bike down the street, and escaping their jeers. It would be easier, but easier wasn't in Walt's nature. He'd faced worse than this. Enemy fire, the screams of the dying, the endless nights wondering if he'd done enough. This was nothing, just noise. Yet the sting was real. The public humiliation, the casual dismissal of a man who'd given so much. It cut deeper than he'd expected. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a quiet rage he hadn't felt in years. He swallowed it, focusing on the chain, each link a small rebellion against their scorn. There was dignity in silence, in doing what needed to be done, no matter who watched or what they thought. It was a lesson forged in the crucible of war, one that had carried him through the long, lonely years of peace. When everyone turns away, only conscience remains, he thought. The words a mantra he had lived by since Da Nang. He didn't need their respect. He didn't need their approval. All he needed was to fix this chain, get to the clinic, and keep moving forward, one pedal at a time. Less than 10 minutes later, the air began to rumble. At first, it was a low hum, like distant thunder, but it grew louder, more insistent, until the ground itself seemed to vibrate. From every direction, the unmistakable roar of Harley-Davidson engines filled the street, a symphony of power that drowned out the bar patrons' laughter. One by one, the bikes appeared, their chrome catching the sunlight as they lined the entire street, encircling the Iron Horse bar. The crowd's mockery faded, replaced by a tense, awestruck silence. Walt, still kneeling by his bike, didn't look up, but he felt the shift in the air, the sudden weight of something larger than himself. What had started as contempt was about to transform into something else entirely. Something that would force every soul in that crowd to reckon with the man they dismissed. Walt knelt on the cracked pavement, his calloused hands smeared with grease as he wrestled with the broken chain of his bicycle. The words his father once spoke echoed in his mind, a quiet mantra that steadied him against the rising tide of laughter spilling from the Iron Horse bar. "Keep your head down, son, and do the work that needs doing." He clung to that wisdom, letting it anchor him as the jeers grew louder, sharper, cutting through the warm evening air. Each snide remark landed like a stone, but Walt's face remained a mask of calm, betraying none of the ache that stirred deep within. He'd faced worse than this, far worse. The mockery of strangers was nothing compared to the weight of memories he carried, of brothers lost in jungles half a world away, of promises made and broken by a country that had turned its back on men like him. The crowd at the bar was a mix of weekend warriors, men and women who slipped into leather jackets on Saturdays to play at Rebellion before returning to their air-conditioned offices come Monday. Their bikes, gleaming and expensive, lined up outside like trophies of a lifestyle they'd bought rather than lived. Patches and logos adorned their vests, symbols of clubs they'd joined for camaraderie, not combat. They saw Walt as an easy target, a weathered old man tinkering with a rusty bicycle in their territory, a blemish on their polished image. What they didn't see was the faded olive-drab cap perched on his head, its Marine Corps emblem worn not as a fashion statement, but as a piece of his soul. They overlooked the small purple heart pin glinting faintly on its side, a silent testament to sacrifices they couldn't begin to fathom. And they missed the quiet dignity in his posture, the way he carried himself even on his knees, as if the weight of a lifetime service still squared his shoulders. But one man saw it all. Michael Gunny Thompson, a 58-year-old former Marine gunnery sergeant, sat slightly apart from the others at an outdoor table, his weathered face half-shadowed by the brim of his own cap. His eyes, trained by years in Desert Storm, caught details the others ignored. The deliberate precision in Walt's movements, the way he arranged his simple tools with the care of a man who'd once depended on order to survive. When Walt rolled up his sleeve to keep it clear of the chain's grease, Gunny's gaze sharpened. A faded tattoo flashed briefly on Walt's forearm, a Force Recon insignia, unmistakable to those who knew. The emblem of the Marines' elite Special Operations Unit wasn't something a man claimed without earning it, not lightly, not ever. Gunny's jaw tightened, a flicker of recognition stirring something deep in his chest. He knew what that mark meant. Missions in the dark, lives on the line, and a brotherhood forged in blood. Without a word, he pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen before he slipped it back into his pocket. His eyes never left Walt, even as he lifted his beer to his lips, the cold glass grounding him as his mind raced. The harassment grew bolder. A younger rider, his face flushed with liquor and emboldened by the laughter of his friends, swaggered over to where Walt worked. "Hey, Grandpa," he called, his voice dripping with scorn. "You're dragging down the vibe here. This place is for real rides, not some kid's toy." He gestured toward the row of polished motorcycles, their chrome catching the last rays of sunlight. Walt didn't look up, just wiped his hands on a small, oil-stained rag, his movements slow and deliberate. The rider's grin faltered, his bravado cracking at Walt's silence. "You hear me, old man? Or are those hearing aids shot too?" A few patrons chuckled, their laughter sharp and hollow, but others began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The sport of mocking an old man fixing a bike was losing its appeal, tipping into cruelty. At a nearby table, a woman with a sun-faded braid whispered to her companion, her voice tight with unease. "This is messed up. Someone should step in, help him, or at least shut those guys up." Her friend, a burly man with a Harley logo on his jacket, shrugged, his eyes fixed on his drink. "Not our fight. He picked the wrong spot to break down." The woman's frown deepened, but she said nothing more, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass as guilt tugged at her. On the sidewalk, a young boy, no older than 10, watched the scene with wide, troubled eyes. He tugged at his father's arm, his voice small but insistent. "Dad, why are they being so mean to that old man? He's not doing anything wrong." The father, a lanky man in a faded flannel, glanced at Walt, his expression conflicted. "Sometimes people just... unkind, son. They're having a bad day." The boy's face scrunched in confusion. "But he's just fixing his bike. Why don't they help?" The father sighed, steering his son away. "It's not our business, kid. Let's go." The boy's footsteps dragged, his small frame radiating a quiet outrage that the adults around him lacked the courage to voice. Walt felt every word, every laugh, like a dull blade against his heart. He'd learned long ago to bury pain, to let it fuel his resolve rather than break him. But the barbs stirred memories he'd fought to keep at bay. Faces of men who'd served beside him flashed in his mind, young, fearless, gone too soon. He thought of the welcome home parades that had never come, the nights spent staring at ceilings in empty rooms, the slow realization that the nation he'd given everything to had moved on, its promises to its veterans little more than platitudes. Yet he kept his head down, his fingers working the chain with a stubborn determination, as if fixing this one small thing could hold the pieces of his world together. Inside the bar, Gunny Thompson watched through the window, his phone buzzing faintly in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, reading the replies to his earlier message, then nodded once to himself, a decision made. Slipping outside, he straddled his motorcycle and made a brief call, his voice low but firm. "This is Gunny. We got a brother in need at the Iron Horse. Vietnam era, Force Recon by the look of him. Some disrespect's going down." He listened for a moment, then said, "Roger that. I'll stand by." Hanging up, he returned to his seat, signaling the bartender for another drink. To anyone watching, he was just another patron, his movements casual, but his eyes now held a glint of purpose, tracking Walt with the patience of a man who knew how to wait for the right moment. Walt was nearly done with the repair, the chain clicking smoothly back into place when the bar door swung open again. The younger rider emerged, now flanked by two friends, their faces flushed with the same liquid courage that had fueled his earlier taunts. Their disdain had hardened into something uglier, a reckless need to assert dominance over the quiet old man who refused to bend. As they approached, Walt's hands stilled, his body tensing imperceptibly, the instincts of a warrior long dormant stirring beneath his calm exterior. The rain was just beginning to speckle the pavement as Walt faced the young man's taunts, the air thick with tension outside the Iron Horse bar. The heckler, emboldened by a few too many drinks and the approving jeers of his friends, loomed over Walt's weathered bicycle, his boot pressing down on the front tire with a sneer that dripped with disdain. "Time's up, old-timer," he barked, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby patrons. "This ain't a rest home. Real customers are trying to have a good time here." His words were sharp, meant to cut, and his posture screamed aggression, as if he could intimidate the old man into vanishing. Walt, hunched over his bike chain, didn't flinch at first. His hands, gnarled from years of hard work and arthritis, moved with a quiet precision, securing the lock with a practiced flick. Only when the heckler leaned closer, his tone growing uglier, "Maybe you didn't hear me, Pops," did Walt lift his gaze. His eyes, a pale blue that had seen decades of life's highs and lows, locked onto the younger man's with an unflinching calm. There was no anger in them, no desperation, just a steady, unyielding clarity. It was the look of someone who had faced real danger, bullets, not bravado, and found this display wanting. For a split second, the heckler faltered, as if Walt's gaze had pierced through his liquor-fueled bravado and found something hollow. But the crowd's laughter egged him on. "You deaf or just dumb? Move this junk heap before I do it for you," he spat, his voice rising to mask the unease Walt's quiet strength had stirred. The atmosphere shifted as patrons outside the bar grew uneasy, their conversations trailing off. The heckler's mockery had crossed into cruelty, and Walt's composed silence only amplified the ugliness of it. To them, Walt was just an old man in a threadbare jacket, his white hair thinning, his bicycle a relic of simpler times. Yet there was something in his bearing, a quiet dignity that made the young man's aggression feel petty, almost shameful. Walt rose slowly, his movements deliberate, betraying none of the stiffness his joints screamed with. He stood tall, facing the heckler without a word, his expression unreadable but resolute. The moment hung heavy, an old man standing alone against a younger, louder adversary backed by a chorus of jeering friends. The contrast was stark, and it made the heckler's bravado seem smaller, less certain. Without breaking eye contact, Walt knelt again, finishing the task of securing his bike. His hands didn't tremble, though his heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of keeping his pride intact. He refused to let this stranger see him waver. When he stood again, he gripped the handlebars and began to wheel his bicycle away, his back straight despite the sting of humiliation. The heckler's voice chased him down the street, sharp and triumphant. "That's right. Keep moving, old man. Don't come back." The words echoed, but Walt didn't turn. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As he walked, the first drops of rain kissed his face, cool and unrelenting. The sprinkle quickly turned into a steady shower, soaking through his thin jacket and plastering his white hair to his forehead. Each step sent a jolt of pain through his arthritic knees, but Walt pressed on, his pace measured, his dignity a shield against the elements in the lingering sting of the confrontation. He had faced worse than rain or rude boys, war zones, loss, the slow grind of time, but that didn't make the moment easier. Inside, a quiet storm churned, frustration at his body's betrayal, a flicker of anger at the injustice, and a deep resolve to keep moving forward. The VA clinic was still 5 miles away, and he'd likely miss his appointment, but stopping wasn't an option. Not here, not now. A car sped by, its tires slicing through a puddle and sending a wave of dirty water over Walt's legs. Laughter erupted from the vehicle, and a young voice shouted, "Get a car, Grandpa!" Before it roared off, Walt paused, leaning slightly on his bike for support, the cold seeping deeper into his bones. His small backpack held his heart medication, but pride kept him from reaching for it in the middle of a public street. He just needed a moment, he told himself, closing his eyes against the rain. A moment to breathe, to steady the ache in his chest, to push down the weight of being seen as less than he was. A man who had served, survived, and carried on. Then, a low rumble cut through the patter of rain, not the fleeting hum of passing cars, but something deeper, more deliberate. The growl of Harley-Davidson engines swelled, growing louder, coming from multiple directions. Walt opened his eyes, his breath catching, as the first motorcycles appeared at the intersection ahead. 3 bikes, then a dozen. Massive machines piloted by riders in leather vests adorned with military patches. They moved with a disciplined grace, their formation tight, slowing traffic to a standstill. Walt's heart stirred, a mix of curiosity and recognition, as if some long-buried part of him knew what was coming. The lead rider, a towering figure with a silver beard and a face carved by years of sun and hardship, raised a hand, and the convoy halted in perfect unison. He dismounted, removing his helmet to reveal a Marine Corps tattoo etched on his neck. The ink faded but proud. Without hesitation, he strode toward Walt through the rain, his boots splashing softly. "Staff Sergeant Walter Jenkins?" he asked, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the storm. Walt straightened instinctively, years of military discipline snapping into place despite the ache in his joints. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady but tinged with confusion. The man snapped to attention, rendering a crisp salute. "Master Sergeant James Cooper, United States Marine Corps, retired. President of the Brothers of Valor Motorcycle Club." Walt returned the salute automatically, muscle memory overriding his surprise. His mind raced. What was this? How did they know his name? But there was no mistaking the respect in Cooper's posture, the weight of shared history in his eyes. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," Cooper said, extending a hand. Walt shook it, feeling the strength in the man's grip, a silent acknowledgement of brotherhood. "We got word one of our own was being disrespected," Cooper continued, glancing back at the riders, now nearly 20 strong, their bikes gleaming under the rain-soaked streetlights. Walt's confusion deepened, but so did a flicker of warmth, a sense that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't standing alone. Rain fell in relentless sheets, soaking the cracked pavement outside the Iron Horse bar. Walt Jenkins, a wiry man in his late 70s, stood hunched beside his battered bicycle, its chain dangling uselessly. The cold seeped into his bones, each drop a reminder of long-forgotten battles in jungles half a world away. His faded jacket clung to his frame, and his eyes, sharp despite the years, scanned the street with a quiet vigilance. He'd lived unnoticed for decades, a solitary figure pedaling through life, carrying memories he rarely shared. The weight of those memories pressed harder than the rain. Across the lot, a low rumble grew as a group of motorcyclists rolled in, their bikes gleaming despite the downpour. Leading them was Cooper, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and a presence that commanded attention. His leather vest bore patches from his time in the Marines, each stitch a testament to years of service. He dismounted, his boots splashing in a puddle, and his gaze settled on Walt. There was no pity in his eyes, only recognition, a spark that cut through the storm. He'd seen the tattoo on Walt's forearm, the faded Force Recon emblem, when Walt had rolled up his sleeve to fiddle with the broken chain. That mark told a story few could read. Cooper approached, his voice steady but warm, like a fire cutting through the chill. "Brother," he said, gesturing toward the bar behind them, "those weekend warriors in there, they wouldn't know service if it knocked them flat. But we do." His words carried the weight of shared experience, of nights spent in the mud, of bonds forged in chaos. Walt's breath caught, his fingers tightening around the handlebars. He hadn't been called brother in years, not since the war. The words stirred something deep, a flicker of pride he'd long buried. Another rider, a younger man with a tarp tucked under his arm, stepped forward. With practiced care, he draped it over Walt's bicycle, shielding it from the rain. The act was simple but deliberate, a quiet gesture of respect that hit Walt harder than he expected. Others joined, forming a loose circle around him, their broad frames blocking the wind. They moved like men who'd done this before, who understood the unspoken code of looking out for their own. Walt's chest tightened, not from the cold, but from the sudden warmth of their presence. He'd spent so long alone, expecting nothing, that this moment felt almost unreal. Cooper's eyes flicked to the tattoo again. Gunny Thompson spotted that ink, he said, nodding toward a grizzled rider nearby. Did some digging. Word is you pulled 5 men out at Unlock in '69. That true? Walt's gaze dropped to the ground, the memories flooding back. Gunfire echoing through the trees, the weight of wounded Marines slung over his shoulders, his own blood soaking his uniform. He'd never spoken of Unlock, not to his neighbors, not to the few friends he'd made in the years since. Just did what needed doing, he muttered, his voice rough, barely audible over the rain. Cooper's nod was slow, understanding. Always the way, isn't it? The real ones never boast. He turned to the group, his voice rising, cutting through the storm. Brothers, attention! Instantly, 30 veterans snapped to attention, rain streaming down their weathered faces, their eyes fixed on Walt. The precision of their movement sent a shiver through him, not from fear, but from awe. These were men who'd seen their own wars, carried their own scars, yet here they stood, honoring him. This is Staff Sergeant Walter Jenkins, Cooper continued, his voice steady but reverent. Force Recon, Vietnam, Unlock, 1969. A murmur rippled through the group, a quiet acknowledgement. Unlock was no footnote in history books for these men. It was a legend, a crucible where ordinary men did extraordinary things. Staff Sergeant Jenkins earned the Silver Star for valor under fire, Cooper said, his words carrying the weight of truth. Paperwork got screwed up, like everything in that war, but he carried 5 wounded Marines to safety, took rounds himself, and kept going. Walt's throat tightened, emotion clawing its way up. He'd never sought recognition, never wanted it. The medal, the stories, they belonged to a life he'd left behind. Yet here, in this rain-soaked lot, these men saw him. Not the old man with the broken bike, but the Marine who'd refused to let his brothers die. His eyes stung and he blinked hard, blaming the rain. Cooper's voice softened, meant for Walt alone now. Sir, it'd be our honor to escort you wherever you're headed today. Walt stared at the group, speechless. For decades, he'd moved through the world quietly, his sacrifices tucked away like old photographs. To be seen, to be honored so openly, it overwhelmed him. His hands trembled slightly, and Cooper, sensing the weight of the moment, placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You never left your brothers behind, he said quietly. We won't leave you either. The scene had drawn a crowd. Pedestrians paused under umbrellas, cars slowed, and patrons spilled out from the Iron Horse, curious about the gathering of bikes. Among them was the heckler, a younger man who'd mocked Walt earlier, calling him a bum for chaining his bike near the bar. He stood in the doorway, his smirk fading as he watched the veteran's display of respect. The contrast between his assumptions and the truth unfolding before him left him visibly unsettled, his mouth slightly agape. Cooper's gaze shifted, hardening as he spotted the heckler. With deliberate steps, he crossed the lot, another veteran respectfully wheeling Walt's bike beside him. The crowd parted, sensing the tension. Cooper stopped in front of the heckler, his presence towering. This bicycle, he said, his voice carrying to the onlookers, belongs to a man who's earned the right to park it anywhere he damn well pleases in this country. His eyes locked onto the heckler's. While you were still in diapers, he was saving American lives under enemy fire. The heckler's face flushed, a mix of shame and defiance flickering in his eyes. How was I supposed to know? He stammered, his voice thin. Cooper cut him off, his tone sharp but controlled. You weren't. That's the point. You don't know who someone is, what they've done, what they've busted up, so maybe next time, instead of mocking an old man with a broken bike, you show some respect. The crowd had grown, some pulling out phones to record the exchange. The heckler, aware of the cameras, took a step back toward the bar. Whatever, man, it's just a bike, he muttered, his bravado crumbling. Cooper shook his head, his voice low but firm. No, son, it's never just about the bike. It's about respect, something you do well to learn. He turned away, dismissing the heckler without another word, and rejoined the veterans. Walt stood among them, still grappling with the weight of their honor. The rain hadn't let up, but for the first time in years, he felt a warmth that no storm could touch. The rain poured relentlessly, each drop a cold jab at Walt Jenkins' resolve. But he pedaled on, his old bicycle creaking beneath him. A retired staff sergeant, Walt carried the weight of Vietnam in his weathered frame. the memories etched deep in his lined face and the quiet ache of his bones. The slick streets of the small town blurred past as he rode toward the VA clinic, his heart heavy but steady, driven by a duty to keep moving forward. The world around him buzzed with impatience, cars honking, people darting under umbrellas. But Walt remained a calm island, his focus on the road, on the simple act of reaching his destination. Outside the Iron Horse Bar, the Brothers of Valor Motorcycle Club stood under the awning, their leather jackets slick with rain. These were men hardened by war and the open road, their eyes sharp with the wisdom of survival. Most barely noticed the old man on the bicycle, but Cooper, their leader, saw something different. A quiet dignity in Walt's hunched posture, a flicker of something unbroken. When a young drunk from the bar jeered, calling Walt a bum and mocking his rusty bike, the words sliced through the air, sharp and cruel. Walt's shoulders stiffened, a pang of shame clashing with the pride he'd buried deep. He didn't turn, didn't respond, but the hurt lingered, a reminder of how the world sometimes saw him. Cooper stepped forward, his boots splashing through puddles, his presence commanding silence. "That's a veteran you're talking to," he said, his voice a low growl, each word carrying the weight of battles fought and brothers lost. The bar fell still, the air thick with the shift of attention. The other bikers turned to Walt, their faces softening with a respect that needed no words. Walt, caught off guard, felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a rare antidote to the loneliness that had shadowed him since his last Vietnam-era friend passed. "VA clinic," he said, his voice raspy but firm, answering Cooper's question about his destination. "Got an appointment." Cooper's nod was slow, deliberate, as if sealing an unspoken vow. "Then you'll get there with an honor guard," he declared, his voice rising to rally the others. "Mount up, brothers. We're escorting a hero." The words struck Walt like a thunderclap, stirring memories of camaraderie he thought he'd lost forever. The bikers moved as one, rain be damned, their boots splashing as they returned to their motorcycles. A scarred rider tied a small American flag to Walt's bicycle, a quiet gesture that tightened Walt's throat with emotion. Cooper grinned, gesturing to a sidecar on his gleaming Harley. "Your chariot awaits, Staff Sergeant," he said, his tone warm but reverent. "Your bike's safe with us." Walt settled into the sidecar, the roar of 30 motorcycles erupting around him, a symphony of power that drowned out the rain and shook the town awake. The sound was more than noise. It was a tribute, a declaration of respect for a man who had served in silence. Walt's heart raced, not with fear, but with a joy he hadn't felt in years. He glanced at the flag fluttering on his bicycle, trailing behind, and felt a swell of pride he'd long suppressed. The townspeople stopped, their faces lit with curiosity and awe as the parade rolled through, a single bicycle at its heart, surrounded by a legion of roaring machines. To Walt, it felt like the world had finally seen him, not as an old man, but as the soldier he'd always been. The escort was just the beginning. Word of the event spread like wildfire, first through veteran networks, then local news, and finally social media, where videos of the confrontation and honor guard went viral. The Brothers of Valor, moved by Walt's quiet strength, voted him an honorary member. At the ceremony, Cooper handed him a leather vest, its weight heavy with meaning. Walt accepted it with a nod, his eyes betraying a flicker of pride. Though he preferred his bicycle's gentle hum to a Harley's roar, he wore the vest to their monthly meetings, where younger veterans listened to his rare Vietnam stories, tales of courage and loss told in a voice soft but steady. The room hushed when he spoke, each listener grappling with the weight of his experiences. Walt's modest pension had always confined his world, but the brothers expanded it. They ensured he never missed a VA appointment, their motorcycles a constant presence. More than transportation, they gave him belonging, a laughter-filled, story-shared brotherhood that filled the void left by friends lost to age and illness. With Cooper's gentle encouragement, Walt began volunteering at a youth center, teaching bicycle repair to kids from struggling families. Their eager faces gave him purpose, their curiosity a reminder of the young soldiers he'd once led. His patience, forged in hardship, made him a beacon for kids who rarely saw kindness. 12-year-old Miguel, a boy with a quick smile and wary eyes, said it best. "Mr. Walt never yells. He says a man who yells doesn't know what he wants to say yet." The words warmed Walt, a quiet proof that his way of being mattered. Every bike from Walt's workshop left with a small American flag and lessons in maintenance. Freedom needs maintenance, he'd tell each child, his voice steady as he handed them their bike. That's true for bicycles and countries both. The kids listened, sensing the depth behind his words. To them, Walt was more than a teacher. He was a quiet hero, a man who fixed things, who listened, who showed strength without raising his voice. The iron horse bar transformed in Walt's wake. The owner, shamed by his patron's cruelty, commissioned a mural on the building's side, a vivid scene of Walt and his bicycle, encircled by protective motorcycles, their riders fierce with loyalty. The caption read, "No brother left behind." It became a landmark, a reminder of the day a community rediscovered honor. Even the heckler sought redemption. After weeks of guilt and community backlash, he found Walt at the youth center. "I didn't see you," he admitted, his voice thick. "I just saw an old man with a broken bike." Walt, ever gracious, nodded. "Most important things don't show up at first glance," he said. "Takes time to notice what matters." The words built a bridge of forgiveness. The children carried Walt's lessons deepest. They saw how he moved without complaint, without seeking praise, doing what needed doing. 10-year-old Sophia captured it in a school essay, "My hero." "Mr. Walt never talks about being brave," she wrote. "He never tells us to respect him. He just fixes bikes and listens. But my dad says he saved people in the war, and now he saves us by showing us how to be better." Her words, read at a school assembly, brought tears to Walt's eyes, though he hid them behind a quiet smile. To him, the kids were his legacy, proof that even a man who felt forgotten could still change the world. In a small town where stories often fade into the hum of daily life, Walt Jenkins lived as a quiet testament to resilience and grace. He was a man who didn't chase the spotlight, who didn't need the clamor of praise to affirm his worth. Instead, he poured his heart into fixing bicycles for children who needed them. Kids whose eyes sparkled with gratitude as they pedaled away on wheels he'd painstakingly restored. For Walt, these acts weren't about glory. They were about giving others a chance to feel the wind in their hair, to know a fleeting sense of freedom. He understood, perhaps more than most, that significance doesn't always come with a megaphone. Sometimes it's the soft clink of a wrench tightening a bolt, or the gentle nod to a child riding off that carries the deepest weight. On Veterans Day, the town decided to honor its heroes with a military appreciation parade, the first in decades. Walt, with his unassuming nature, wasn't one for pomp or ceremony. When they asked him to serve as Grand Marshal, he hesitated, his brow furrowing at the thought of being center stage. But something in the earnest faces of the organizers, perhaps their genuine respect for his service, convinced him to agree. So there he was, leading the procession on his freshly painted Schwinn bicycle, its chrome gleaming under the autumn sun. The sight of him pedaling steadily, his posture upright despite the weight of years and memories, stirred something in the crowd. Behind him rode the Brothers of Valor, a group of veterans whose camaraderie was forged in shared sacrifice. And behind them, a joyful parade of children rode bicycles Walt had fixed, their laughter mingling with the crisp air. Each turn of their pedals was a tribute to the man who'd given them not just bikes, but a sense of possibility. As the parade wound through the town's heart, it passed the Iron Horse Bar, a place where stories were swapped over cold drinks and the jukebox played songs of simpler times. The writers, local storytellers who gathered there to weave tales of the town's past, paused their chatter. In a spontaneous act of reverence, they stepped outside and formed a corridor of honor leading to a mural on the bar's wall, a vibrant depiction of Walt's younger self, proud and resolute in his military uniform. The gesture caught Walt off guard. His throat tightened, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears as he took in the sight of these men and women, strangers and friends alike, standing tall to honor him. The crowd's applause swelled, a wave of gratitude that seemed to lift him. Yet all he could muster was a quiet nod, his humility as steadfast as ever. In that moment, Master Sergeant Cooper, a fellow veteran who'd seen Walt's quiet heroism up close, leaned toward a reporter. "Sometimes," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "it's the quiet ones, the ones who stand firm without a word, who remind us that honor never fades. Walt Jenkins had spent decades in the shadows of his own sacrifices. The war had left its marks, scars on his body and deeper ones on his soul. He carried memories of battles fought, friends lost, in a world that moved on while he stood still, nursing wounds that no one could see. It would have been easy to let bitterness take root, to rail against a society that often overlooked the men and women who'd given so much. Many veterans did, and who could fault them? The world could be unkind, quick to forget the cost of freedom. But Walt chose a different path, one paved with quiet dignity. When his bicycle chain snapped, he knelt to fix it, his hands steady despite the ache in his joints. When a child needed help, he was there, offering not just a repaired bike, but a moment of care in a world that could feel indifferent. He asked for nothing in return, not a thank you, not a nod of recognition. For Walt, the act itself was enough. How many Walt Jenkinses walk among us? The unsung heroes whose courage lies hidden beneath ordinary exteriors. The cashier who tucks combat medals away in a dusty drawer, their valor known only to the ghosts of their past. The bus driver who once dragged comrades from the wheeze of a burning wreck, now navigating city streets with the same steady hand. The janitor whose scars tell stories of lives saved, yet who sweeps floors without a word of complaint. We pass them every day, these quiet warriors, their strength cloaked in humility. They don't demand our attention, don't wave their sacrifices like banners. Yet, when someone like Cooper spots a brother in arms, when a community pauses to see the invisible, their stories shine through, radiant and undeniable. What lingers most about Walt's story isn't the moment at the Iron Horse bar when he faced a heckler's scorn, nor the dramatic arrival of the brothers of valor to stand by his side. It's the image of Walt rising from fixing his bicycle chain, his hands smudged with grease, his eyes meeting his harassers without a trace of anger or desperation. In that fleeting exchange, he didn't plead for respect or lash out in defense. He simply stood, his quiet strength a rebuke to cruelty, and continued on his way. That act, unyielding, unbowed, embodies a courage rarely celebrated but profoundly needed. It's the courage to keep going, to refuse to be diminished, to hold fast to dignity when the world tempts you to break. In a culture that thrives on noise, where fame is chased and spectacle is king. Walt Jenkins offers a different kind of heroism. His life reminds us that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the soft tread of a man walking away from mockery, the steady rhythm of a wrench turning, the silent nod to a child riding a bike for the first time. These are the victories of the quiet warriors, the ones who fight not with fists or words, but with patience, resilience, and an unshakable sense of honor. They don't seek headlines or applause, yet their lives ripple outward, touching others in ways that endure long after the noise fades. The next time you see an elderly person struggling with a simple task, a veteran sitting alone on a park bench, or anyone facing the world's harshness with quiet grace, think of Walt Jenkins. Behind their unassuming exteriors may lie stories of courage and sacrifice that would take your breath away. They are the heroes who don't shout, the champions whose victories come not in moments of glory, but in the quiet, steadfast choice to keep going, to keep giving, to keep standing firm. In their silence, they speak volumes, reminding us that some forms of honor need no advertisement, and some forms of strength shine brightest when no one seems to be watching.